Hello, thank you very much for watching. Today we're going to look at a dialogues essay plan for the final Year 2 Christianity topic. So this is migration and pluralism. I'll be quite upfront about that. I think this is quite a hard question. So this is why I really wanted to break one down step by step for you. So let's have a look at what the question is. So I've gone for this. Inclusivism is the only reasonable approach for Christians to take in multicultural Britain. Critically examine and evaluate this claim with reference to the dialogue between Christianity and philosophy. Now, this isn't a question from AQA. I'm pretty sure this is one that I've devised, but it's not massively dissimilar to one that came up a couple of years ago, which was the beliefs of all religions are equally valid. Now, you might think, well, they're not that similar at all. But actually, I think you would end up using a lot of the same stuff to answer them. So I think this would be a fair question to set, this or something quite like it. So just to remind you, dialogues is worth 25 marks. So it's broken down into 10 marks of AO1, 15 marks AO2. And in the exam, assuming you don't have extra time, you'd have about 45 minutes to do this. So I've done a plan of how I would do it, but I just want to say a few things before I get into that. With dialogues, there are lots and lots and lots of possible routes through any question. They're deliberately devised like that. They're devised to be very broad so that you can show your knowledge in a variety of ways. So it's really, really important before we get into it that you understand I'm going to show you one possible route through the question. This is how I would do it. If you want to do it a different way, if you think that you've got points that are slightly different than mine, that's absolutely fine. If you also kind of watch the video and think, well, this is more than I could do in 45 minutes, that's absolutely fine. I'm probably going to take you through more than you would actually need, but I want to give you a range of points so that you can select your favourites. The order that I go through the points in is not massively important. You could do them in a different order, you could use different points, you could miss things out. And this is something that people ask me a lot. There's no requirement for a 50-50 split between stuff from the Christianity side of the course and stuff from the philosophy side of the course. And in fact, with this question, I think it would be very, very difficult to do a 50-50 split. But I will hopefully show you how to make some links. Okay, so here's the argument that I'd probably get into in my first paragraph. And as usual, I'm not going to bother with an introduction because I don't think it's going to add anything. And I think if I cover everything that I want to cover elsewhere, it's just not needed. So my first paragraph is going to introduce this idea of inclusivism versus exclusivism. Now, because it's a 25 marker, it's a dialogues, and there's 10 AO1 marks up for grabs, so knowledge marks, you're going to want to define these terms. So if I was actually writing this essay in full, I wouldn't, like I say, I wouldn't do an introduction, but in this first paragraph, I would probably say what these words meant in the context of the essay. But here I'm going to focus on the argument because I think that's harder to get right. So on the one hand, inclusivism is much more reasonable than exclusivism because there are major problems with exclusivism relating to the nature of God being all loving and all powerful. So what I mean here is exclusivists claim that only certain people are saved and you have to have very specific beliefs, namely to believe that Jesus died for your sins in order to be saved, and you are saved only through the channel of that faith. Now, that might seem totally in line with Christian beliefs, but there's a couple of problems with it if we're thinking about the nature of God. So why would an all-loving God put such restrictions on who can be saved? Why would a loving God not want to save everybody? And also, if you can only be saved through the channel of your faith, doesn't that potentially suggest a limitation on God? Doesn't that suggest that God can only do it this way, whereas in fact, if God's omnipotent, surely God can do whatever he wants. Now, the other side of the argument is the second point here. But many Christians can't get past this idea of exclusivism, and it's because of Jesus. If there are many different paths to salvation, why did Jesus have to die? And this is a bit of a problem that some Christians have with inclusivism and also with pluralism. They feel that it undermines the doctrine of the atonement. So if there's lots and lots of ways to get to heaven, and it's not all about Jesus dying for people's sins, then you could ask, why did that have to happen? Why was that important? So what I would do in this paragraph is I would lay out those 2 points of view, and then I would evaluate which, the strengths and weaknesses of each. Now, it's a little bit problematic if I try to do that here for you, because if you end up having a go at this essay, I don't want to get in your head too much, and I want the evaluation to be yours. I think evaluation is far more powerful when it's in your own voice, rather than you just saying what you think the examiner wants to hear. Okay, let's move on to paragraph 2. So here, I would talk a little bit about Christian teachings, Christian beliefs about other faiths. I'm still using the language of inclusivism, exclusivism, because that's the question. So on the one hand, Christianity teaches love for neighbours, so exclusivism is not compatible with this. And again, because I've got the word multiculturalism in the question, I'm going to put it in the answer here. Multiculturalism should not be seen as a threat to Christianity. Now, the example I would use here is something like the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is Jesus telling a story that has an anti-racism message, making it clear that, even if someone has nothing in common with you and they're of a different race, they are still your neighbour. So if that's the case, then surely Jesus wanted people to reach out and not be sort of very inward looking. Now, there's a bit here that I haven't put on the slide, which you could also use as a counter argument to this. Exclusivists could say, well, we do that because we evangelize. We try to bring more people to the truth, but we think that there is only one truth and it's our job to bring people to it. Equally, you could use this point that I've made here. Truth claims from other religions and cultures might not be acceptable to Christians if they undermine Christian teachings, such as religious experiences and miracles that don't support Christian teachings. So that's a reason to not adopt an inclusivist view. If beliefs, teachings, events from other faiths undermine what Christianity teaches, Christians might just not be able to get on board with them. The reason I've put religious experiences and miracles there is because this is an area where you can start to make a little bit of a link to philosophy, particularly talking about possibly Christian miracles such as the resurrection. If that's understood as a miracle for Christians, but it's not understood as a miracle in another faith, we've got a problem there, because both those things can't really be true at the same time. Okay, next I would do a bit on Karl Rahner and anonymous Christians, because Rahner's a scholar that's on the spec for this, so I think it's quite important that you put him in. The examiners are, you're not going to be penalised for not using him, but I think he'd be on the list of things the examiners were probably expecting to see. So his concept of anonymous Christians it's an inclusivist view, but it's still based on the idea that Christianity is the right religion and the true religion. What he basically means by an anonymous Christian, and I apologise if I'm telling you things you already know, he says that lots of people never hear the message of Christianity. Lots of people are brought up in different cultures, different traditions. So his take on it is that if somebody lives a good life, lives a life that's morally comparable with a good Christian life, even if they're Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, or atheist, they almost might as well have been a Christian, so they can be saved. So if he's right about this, then loads of people are going to be saved. Loads of people are anonymous Christians. And so it doesn't make any sense to take this exclusivist stance and say, no, you have to be this kind of Christian. So Rana's definitely an inclusivist. But there's a few problems with his argument. Firstly, exclusivists just aren't going to accept it because they are very, very locked into this belief that salvation is only possible through a relationship with Christ. And also Hicks got a problem with it from a different point of view. He finds it quite patronising to other faiths. So he doesn't think that it's okay for Rana to be saying, well, Christianity is the truth, but if you've lived a little bit like that truth, then you might as well have lived that truth. Because if you're a Muslim or a Sikh or an atheist, you might think, well, no, I've actually lived my life the way I believe it was right, not just a version of the truth that somebody else is telling me. Okay, so we've broken the back of it if we've done those 3 paragraphs. I would go on to a 4th one here and I would look at the Bible. Now, this is actually more straightforward than some of what we've gone through already. So, in simple terms, the Bible has some passages that seem to be in favour of inclusivism and some that seem to be in favour of exclusivism. So on the one hand, the Bible says God does not show favouritism. In fact, it says that at least twice and refers to both Jews and Gentiles, Gentiles being non-Jews, suggesting that the early church was trying to talk to everybody and that people from different religions, different backgrounds can all have a path to God and a path to salvation. But on the other hand, we've got this quote from John's Gospel. It's John chapter 14, and you need to know this for the exam because they can put this in questions. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. Now that's Jesus saying that, and that seems to make it clear that, well, if Jesus is saying it, why would he say it if it wasn't true? It seems to close down this inclusivist stance and say that actually, no, nobody does come to the Father except through Jesus. Jesus is the only path to salvation. And then paragraph 5, this isn't pitching inclusivism up against exclusivism. It's putting it up against Hicks pluralism. So this is slightly better, slightly different, sorry. On the one hand, we can say inclusivism works better, that's the word I was trying to read, than Hicks Universalism, which goes too far by suggesting that there's many lifetimes after death. This goes against Christian teachings. Hicks got some really interesting ideas about universal salvation and life after death, but to buy into them, you have to step quite a long way outside of traditional Christianity, which some people are just not really able to do. But on the other hand, maybe inclusivism doesn't go far enough and Hicks Universalism is better because it's truly pluralist. It values other religions properly, not just through a Christian lens, which is what Rana does, and also a little bit what Karl Barth does. So there's a bit in the textbook that you can look at where Barth talks about how he thinks religion is actually irrelevant, because if God's going to save you, God's going to save you. And that doesn't have anything to do with what you do or don't do. It's entirely up to God. Right, so I think that's plenty of content. That would be more than enough. What you do need, though, is a conclusion. So think about what's the strongest argument in your essay? What's the argument that you are going to find it easiest to defend? In your conclusion, you're going to defend it. But you've got to be a little bit skillful about this. How are you going to make sure that you don't just repeat yourself? Because you're not going to get credited twice for the same things. And then something that I would always do in a conclusion is think, how can you use the wording of the question to help you? How can you put some of the wording of the question into the answer to make sure that the argument that you're concluding with is on point to that question? If you don't do that, it can end up being a little bit vague and a little bit woolly, and you don't want that. Okay, we're nearly done. This is the last thing. This is just a list of areas where I think you can do some links to your philosophy content. So the first one, I think there's scope here to do quite a bit of belief in versus belief that. So you can apply this in different ways. The one I thought of was to talk about you can believe in Jesus living on after death, or the message of Jesus living on after death. So that's belief in Jesus, without being required to believe that he literally rose from the dead. Now, if you can do that, if you can go for the belief in approach rather than the belief that approach, that can bring you into common ground with other faiths and other denominations. So, for example, Jesus is also an important figure in Islam. Now, we haven't got belief about the resurrection quite so much, but believing in his importance and that his work as a messenger of God, that brings in some commonality with Christianity. Like I said before, you can use religious experience and miracles. Now, on the one hand, religious experiences and miracles might kind of lock in an exclusivist view. So if somebody believes that God has revealed the truth to them, they're not going to accept anything to contradict that. But from a philosophical view, it's very, very difficult to trust miracles and religious experiences because they're so difficult to verify. I also think there's a way to bring in religious language, weirdly enough. So statements in the Bible can be understood cognitively, trying to convey facts, or non-cognitively, trying to convey a different sort of meaning. And we know this because if we read the Bible, we can see there's lots of different kinds of writing. So I think I would apply this to John 14. I am the way, the truth, and the life, etc. We don't know that Jesus said that. That's one thing. It's in the Bible, but that's not the same as saying we know for sure historically that he said it. Also, we might not know all of the context. Maybe that makes sense within a particular language game. Maybe he was speaking non-cognitively. We don't know, but that's a question that you can raise to show how you can use philosophy to challenge some of these Christian beliefs. And then the last one, a little bit of a nuclear option, but you can do it. It could be argued from a philosophical point of view that no faith claims should ever be accepted if they run contrary to reason and experience. So that would go for any claims outside of Christianity, but also a lot of Christianity's claims as well. So this is something that Hume might say, it's something that Dawkins might say. All right, I know that's been a lot. Hopefully it will give you a little bit of confidence to attempt an essay like this. Like I said at the start, I think this is about as hard as dialogues gets. So if you can make a decent fist of this one, you're probably in good shape. But I hope it's helped you to figure out how to plan and realise that actually you've got the skills. It's just a case of putting them together in the right way. All right, thanks for sticking with me. Well done, and I'll see you next time.